Labor's shared equity scheme is set to fail. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Let's have a look at this article discussing the failure of Labor's, well, as the ABC are calling it, help to buy scheme. You know, just this good idea to help people get into housing. Now, as we all know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Schemes like this from the government that sound good always end up having unintended consequences that the mainstream and normie people don't realize until years later. Now, government coming in and having shared equity to help people buy their homes is a terrible idea. We don't want the government owning, we as a state, do we want to own parts of individual people's houses? Why not, instead of the government keeping housing prices jacked up and making housing unaffordable to a lot of people, why not we look at reducing the burden the state is placing on younger Australians? I heard an interesting idea where taxation should be tied towards, well, where you are in your stage of life. You've got all these older people that are taking advantage of all of these different schemes to minimize their tax, like any person would. But the younger people, people in their 30s who have a young family and need their money, they don't have those same schemes or mechanisms. What about if your first $500,000 that you earn in your entire life was tax-free? Entirely tax-free for you to do with as you saw fit. Then once you reach that threshold, well, you can be established, you can get a home, then you start contributing to the greater society. But no, ideas like that are too controversial. Probably would require some, well, let's just say cuts to services that people wouldn't want to put up with. Labor's Help to Buy scheme was set to fail in the Senate until they couldn't bring on the vote. So the federal government has failed to bring on a do-or-die Senate vote for its cornerstone housing legislation, with the Greens and the Coalition moving to delay a final decision, potentially setting the stage for a double dissolution election and early poll. Oh, I wonder how Albo would go at the polls there. Have a look at the New South Wales election results. Look at how the Libertarians did. A lot of the councils. In a day of high drama on the Senate floor, the opposition and almost the entire crossbench combined to stymie government efforts to put its shared equity scheme to a vote. Now, I think shared equity is a horrific idea. It is a terrible, terrible idea. We don't want the government getting involved in people's houses. See, this is what Labor's putting forward, the shared equity scheme, and their union and super fund mates are poo-pooing the Coalition's idea of allowing people to access your own super, and even having to pay that back after you sell your property. We need to get Aussies owning houses. And I suspect, maybe I'll put my tinfoil hat here, this is all to keep people in bed and dependent on the state. We don't want, I think a lot of leftists don't want that independence starting to build up in the population because, well, then that shifts the Overton window. Furious Labor senators accuse the Coalition and Greens of using procedural tricks to avoid being forced to formally record their opposition to an initiative the government said would bring relief to tens of thousands of struggling home buyers. No, it'll just make you more of the government's bitch. That's what it'll do. We don't need schemes like this. We need to find ways to reduce the burden on people buying housing. It's never going to get cheap. I don't think there's going to be a crash in housing is going to correct miraculously. Before that happens, there will be bailouts and interventions that you couldn't possibly fathom here in Australia. We need to look at getting housing cheaper by reducing the legislation, reducing burdens, getting some innovative approaches to it. Why do you think everyone's going down this bloody tiny house path? It's so they can get around the rules and legislation. No one wants to live in a box. Okay, sure. I'm sure a few people kid themselves into imagining that they do, but you want space. We remain committed to it. It remains on the table, said Finance Minister Kate Katie Gallagher, oh, I hope this is a one-term government, I really do, who added that Labor will make another attempt on Wednesday. This is us forcing the issue, no longer will be held ransom by the Greens. A double dissolution election, which would force every senator to seek re-election, requires Parliament to reject a bill twice, with a gap between the two votes of at least 3 months. The PM doesn't rule out double dissolution. Speaking ahead of Tuesday's Senate machinations, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese pointedly left open the prospect of a double dissolution, saying when asked about the issue, we'll wait and see. I mean, that might be a perfect outcome. Maybe not for Albanese, but we may get a reshuffle of the Senate. I think people are much more likely to vote for minors in the Senate than they are for House of Reps. I'll tell you a way to avoid a double D. It's for the coalition and Greens to vote for legislation that they support, he said. Government sources indicate the government's crash through approach to its housing legislation may be replicated with other key bills at the near and top of the Senate agenda. This includes Labor's Future Media in Australia Industrialisation Policy Plan and a bill to establish an Environmental Protection Agency. Assistant Trade Minister Tim Ayres told the ABC it was the government's intention to have the Senate vote on the Future Made bill this week. All are opposed by the coalition or subject to negotiation with the Greens. This is why, everyone, when at the election we were raising concerns about the Greens getting into Parliament and the influence they have, Labor's having to bend the knees to them. And the policies that's coming out from this party are ludicrous. Some of them are utterly ludicrous. They're only getting in because people don't understand the implications of what they're putting forward. So, they've made demands that the government says are unreasonable. These include a nationwide rent freeze. The removal of negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts. With an election due no later than May 17th, the government has shifted this week to a tactic of forcing votes on bills that appear set to fail in an effort to wedge the coalition and the Greens. Labor's so-called Help to Buy bill would enable the government to provide first-home buyers with loan guarantees, enabling 40,000 Australians to reduce their deposits for bank loans. The Greens have accused the government of trying to bulldoze the Parliament with measures that were inadequate to fix the housing crisis. I think it's astonishing that the Prime Minister's first point of call is to start threatening an early election rather than say he will negotiate to get legislation through the Senate, Greens leader Adam Bant said. That strikes me as the Prime Minister playing politics. What do you think the Prime Minister's going to do? He's been playing politics his entire term. He got in, wasted huge amounts of money on a referendum we didn't need, pissed it all away. How many houses could that have built? How many homes could that have provided? How many school spots? How much of a reduction in ambulance ramping? How much could that have helped Indigenous Australians in remote communities? Oh, well, somehow I suspect we're going to be talking about the same thing year in, year out for some time. Coalition leader in the Senate, Simon Birmingham, taunted the government, saying, if hot air and rhetoric were homes, the housing crisis would be solved. The Albanese government cannot execute its strategy to have one of its own bills defeated. They managed to convince just one non-Labor senator to vote with them. In an interview with the ABC radio on Tuesday, Mr. Albanese slammed the minor party for opposing the Help to Buy bill, describing their position as nonsense. It's beyond my comprehension how the Greens can vote with the coalition against a policy that's pretty straightforward. This is a Senate-only sitting week. They've been sitting for 2 days. They haven't passed a single thing. They haven't voted on anything. They're just talking away, stopping things being voted on. Vote for this legislation or be honest and vote against it, rather than what is effectively a vote against the legislation along with the coalition. The Senate is scheduled on Wednesday to consider government business from about 10:15 for 2 hours. Boy, they really have to work hard there, guys. Well, let's have a talk about this. Now, as I've said many times before, I'm not a fan of this shared equity scheme that the government is putting forward. I think we need to look at other ways of reducing the burden of the state on our younger people who are looking at getting into homes so that they can build up those deposits. If you're there hoping and waiting for a huge correction, I can't see it happening. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode of HeiseSays. Bye for now.